Good evening everybody and welcome to Development Control, first one of the year. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and we meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Thank you, Bernie. Mobile phones, if you can switch them off or turn them to silent. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am Chairman of this committee. To my right and left are councillors who will be making decisions on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep to the points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning application to a maximum of 4 minutes. We did have 8 items on the agenda, but that has been reduced to 6, so hopefully we'll be able to go home in about 2 hours. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Thank you. Right. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Apologies I've had from Councillor Court and Councillor Frost. And substitution, I've got Councillor McCormick for Councillor Freeman. Are there any others? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Michael Howard Sorrell sends his apologies. He too has got COVID and he's not feeling well enough to attend. He could potentially attend because he's completely self-isolation, but he's not feeling up to it.
Thank you for that. Right. Urgent matters. I haven't got any. Greg? No? Nothing? Right. Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of December 2021. I'm happy with them. Is everybody else happy with them? I'll move it. Now, seconder, Councillor Ganesh. Everybody content? Good, thank you. Right, planning applications. Item 1, Lower Link Farm, St Marybourne, has been deferred for some technical reason. That'll be coming back at a later date. So that's that one out of the way. Item 2, land at St Michael's Close, North Waltham. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. It's an application at St Michael's Close, North Waltham, as you say, for a technical details consent for the erection of 2 dwellings with associated access, garaging, parking and landscaping pursuant to permission and principal approval from 19/1954/PIP which was up to 4 dwellings. So this proposal is for just 2 as a technical details consent that follows. There is a short update on your update paper that just corrects inaccuracy in the main agenda report, correcting the area of woodland planting, which was listed as 1.1 hectare, and confirming that that's 0.289 hectare, together with a bio-bubble treatment plant as well, which is all agreed by Natural England. There is also a short verbal update. The agenda report indicates that surface water runoff would be to an infiltration basin via the porous paved access road. This is in fact the previous proposal. The current scheme proposes the discharge of surface water solely into the porous paved access road, thus omitting the originally proposed infiltration basin from the drainage strategy. That's the same as the allowed appeal, where the inspector found the drainage scheme acceptable, subject to condition. It's also of note, obviously, that the local lead flood authority have no objection to the proposal as is. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And could we have Mr. Gerald Dodson and Mr. Richard Wyatt to the speakers' chairs, which are over there? Yep. And thank you. Are you Mr. Dodson or Mr. Wyatt?
My name is Richard Wyatt.
Thank you. You have 4 minutes. The microphone button is in front of you, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, my name is Richard Wyatt. I live at number 29 St Michael's Close. I'll be talking on behalf of Gerald Dodson, who lives at Boundary House, and for the community of St Michael's Close. We first spoke when the PIP stage, and the councillors expressed frustration that they felt compelled to approve it due to the process and the lack of a 5-year plan. It was at the TDC stage where local knowledge demonstrated, to quote the councillor, that water cannot flow uphill, and you rejected that application. Local knowledge is very important in situations like this. Expert judgment and standard reports can only get us so far. Number 24, beg your pardon, Sue and Stu have lived in the close since it was built. They have never known it to flood at all until the new buildings were erected. Number 6 is now being supplied by sandbags by the council to limit the water damage to their property. Both number 4 and number 2 had difficulty leaving their homes when it floods. Number 7, Dave and Julie, accepted an offer on their house, only to have it withdrawn when the survey highlighted the flooding in the close. I believe everyone has the right to make money out of their investments, but not to the detriment of so many other people. Extending this development of a field above St Michael's Close will only cause flooding issue to get worse. The porous road Greg talked about has not changed since the last time you looked at this review, except for the pond, which is still there, and it is no longer called an attenuation pond, probably never was. I did watch a team dig holes and fill them with water. These holes, to the best of my knowledge, coincided with the foundations of the proposed houses. They were nowhere near the proposed porous road. These holes and water might have nothing to do with the runoff report, but I suspect they do, and the location of the holes might have been an oversight, but I think it should be looked into. I'm further concerned that on page 113, paragraph 2, that the applicant acknowledges that the porous road might not work, but is not part of the considerations that were presented to the councillors, page 116 to 121. I would have thought proof that this would work would be a prerequisite to the building of the approval of these buildings. Perhaps get someone to dig a hole and fill them with water, but in the right place. Just an idea. Dave, at number 7, has lived in St Michael's Close for 20 years, over 20 years. He said during that time, the council had to clear the sewage about once or twice a decade. Last year it was 3 times. Yes, 3 times in a single year. Raw sewage bubbles up. Without major work being carried out on our infrastructure, this can only get worse. I suspect we've reached a tipping point, and additional homes will not cause a linear deterioration, but there'll be a false multiplier of the failures of our 40-plus-year-old infrastructure. Not just the drainage and the sewage, but the electrical supply. We covered this in depth at the PIP, and the last SSE...
You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. The last SSE team member I spoke to said it will carry, when he was fixing a failure, said it will carry on getting worse as we pull more current. Coming into the meeting, councillors may be thinking this was a simple provisional approval and wait for the nitrate agreement. I hope I've shown you you have more agency than that, and there are wider considerations. Local knowledge is very important, and at no point have you been shown topographical maps of this application. When you rejected the last TDC, it was your local knowledge of the close, linked with the assertion that water cannot run uphill, that caused you to reject the application. The laws of fluid dynamics have not changed. We have a couple more expert judgments and a year's worth of experience from the local community to counter them. I urge you to take on board local experience, tragic almost, and reject this application a further time. Let's say no means no this time. Thank you, councillors, for taking time to listen to me and the concerns of the community. I will try and answer any questions you have.
Thank you. If you could turn the microphone off, it would be very helpful. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Wyatt? No, I have none. Thank you very much, Mr. Wyatt. There's a box of wipes in front of you. Could just wipe down basically anything you've touched. I'm sure the next speaker would appreciate it. And the next speaker is Catherine Miles. Good evening, and you have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening. Thank you, councillors. Permission in principle was granted in October 2019 for a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4 dwellings. The PIP application agreed the principle of a residential land use in this location. In October 2020, a technical details consent application for 2 dwellings was refused. The committee concluded that the development would increase surface water runoff and that it had not been adequately demonstrated that the impact of the development would be mitigated through a suitable drainage strategy. That was despite the officers at the time recommending approval of the application. An appeal against that decision was made. The inspector commented that whilst the committee wasn't duty-bound to accept the advice of its officers, if a different conclusion was reached, it must clearly demonstrate on planning grounds why that proposal was unacceptable. The inspector noted that there was no substantive evidence that the appeal scheme would intensify flood risk. The inspector concluded that sufficient details had been submitted and that the detailed drainage strategy could be secured by condition. The appeal was allowed and costs were awarded. This technical details consent application is for a similar development to that was allowed on the appeal. The only difference is in the design of the dwelling at Plot 1, where its frontage has been squared off. That is the only change. There's no other change to the proposal before you. The technical details consent has been recommended for approval on the basis that the proposal would be well related to the surrounding development, will have no significant impacts on landscape character, and officers consider that this is a sustainable form of development which would preserve the character and appearance of the adjacent North Waltham Conservation Area. Ecological mitigation measures have been proposed to avoid any adverse impacts to biodiversity, and it's been demonstrated that a biodiversity net gain can be achieved. The site is within flood zone 1 and therefore has a low probability of flooding. Given the site area and location, neither a flood risk assessment nor a drainage strategy needed to be submitted. However, a drainage technical note was submitted with the application, and this has been agreed with officers. It is proposed to discharge surface water runoff into a porous paved access road. The strategy demonstrates that this area is capable of accommodating the surface water runoff from the development, including a 1 in 100-year flood event and with a 40% allowance for climate change. Essentially, it achieves green field runoff rates, the same rates that the field achieves currently. This strategy has been accepted by the lead local flood authority and is secured by condition 15 as set out in the officer's report. The applicant is aware of the nitrate calculation for the development and has proposed the nitrate mitigation plan, which proposes to use a biobubble unit to deal with foul discharge. The system has a significant benefit in reducing the total nitrogen output from the site, meaning that an offset area on site of 0.289 hectares is required. That will be converted from grazing land within the applicant's ownership to woodland as requested by Natural England and secured in perpetuity via a legal agreement, a draft of which is substantially with the council at the moment.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. An updated management plan was submitted to demonstrate the woodland and should be acceptable to Natural England. Overall, we consider the proposal represents a high-quality, sustainable form of development. It has been thoroughly and independently assessed by both your officers and a spectrum on an appeal. We therefore hope that you concur with your officers and approve this application subject to the completion of the legal agreement. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. If you could turn the microphone off, please. Thank you. Questions for the speaker? Okay, I have one. Can you very briefly tell us the difference between this application and the one that was approved at appeal? Yeah, what is the fundamental difference between the two?
It's the footprint, the shape of plot 1. So as approved, it's like an L-shaped footprint, and we've simply squared the frontage off, so it's a slightly larger footprint on plot 1 to meet the applicant's requirements.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Catherine. Can you just confirm for me, from what you've just said, the pond, is that in the same location and to the same plan as it was in the previous application?
The pond is still there, but it's for biodiversity improvements only. It's not part of the drainage strategy. So if that was your question, the drainage strategy is just the porous paving. It doesn't rely on the pond.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. If you could have a wipe down as the previous speaker. Questions to there are no more speakers, so questions to officers. Councillor McCormick.
To what extent will an increased footprint impact on the drainage of this site?
Very marginally, considering the very small increase in the overall floor area, but the applicant has updated the flood risk assessment submitted. So it was version 6 that was submitted with the appeal, and it's version 7 that we've got before us now. Consultation was undertaken with the local lead flood authority on that, who confirmed that they had no objection to it.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Again, another drainage question. On page 113, it does make the comment that the appellant has said, should infiltration subsequently be found not to be feasible, the word feasible implies to me they can't achieve it, as opposed to it doesn't work. The appellant acknowledges an alternative drainage scheme. Now, we have condition 15, I notice, which is basically said it has to conform with the plans. What can we do, given the fact that we've heard from local residents of historical or for many years problems, and then also this comment from the applicant saying, if it's not kind of feasible, this is the worry of the word. Can we tighten up condition 15 is what I'm saying.
Condition 15 requires that development is carried out in accordance with the approved drainage details. That is the scheme that we've got before us. It's been subject to the local lead flood authority comments. So if the developer, for whatever reason, finds that scheme, for whatever technical reason, can't work and they need to do something different, they need to apply to vary that condition, and we'd need to consider that separately.
Thank you. Supplementary on that then is, does that mean if it's proved, just to clarify, if it's proven not to actually be successful, therefore it might comply, but it doesn't work? That was really how we can manage that situation.
It's been assessed by the local lead flood authority, or the experts on such matters, and they've confirmed that it meets their expectations, so it will work.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up where Chris has left off, if we heard rightly from the objector in regard to sewage, can we just clarify where the lead flood authority sits in regard specifically to that point? Flood risk, surface water and so on as part of the report, but where do we sit in terms of that example that was given as a potential issue for residents?
So the proposal isn't to connect to the mains drainage, it's for a packaged sewage treatment plant. So I think the concerns regarding the sewage system were the existing mains sewage system, and this proposal is, like I said, for a packaged sewage treatment plant, so you won't add to that existing sewer system.
Any more questions? No? Okay, it's debate. Would anybody like to start it off? Okay, Councillor McCormick, thank you.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Our previous application, we heard very stringent representations from residents about flooding. We listened to them. We put forward that case as a reason for refusal, subsequently overturned on appeal by the planning inspector. And I think we're all looking at the flooding again, but I really don't have a very high degree of confidence that given the changes in the plan, if we were to refuse it on those reasons again, it wouldn't fail at appeal. So I'm reluctant to move refusal on it. I'll wait to hear what other people have to say before we vote to whatever is moved.
Okay, I see no other hands. And I must say, I agree with Councillor McCormick. When we refused this before, I was instrumental in refusing it. And effectively, my opinion hasn't changed, but we have effectively been overruled. So whilst I'm not happy about it, if we refuse this, I'm absolutely clear that we will be overruled again, which will achieve nothing for the residents of St Michael Close and cost the residents of Basingstoke money in appeal fees. So on that basis, I have no alternative but to recommend approval. Would anybody like to second that? Councillor Harvey, thank you very much. Anybody else want to say anything on it before we take it to the vote? No. Been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that the application is approved, subject to the completion of a legal agreement in accordance with the conditions recommended in the agenda paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3 has been deferred. So we are to item 4, which rather oddly, and I don't understand why, is fundamentally the same application again. Mr. Wyatt, would you like to speak on this again? You have the right. I think not, is the honest answer, but you do have the right. The application is here for you.
I'll take a few minutes of the council's time to talk specifically about.
You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Try not to take up.
Could you put the microphone on, please?
Although normally my voice covers very well. I'd like to talk about governance and control. You've already approved the TDC. What controls and governance will we be putting in place, conditions notwithstanding, Greg, to ensure that this doesn't change, that the footprint doesn't change and the water still flows? I will use case example. The houses which you approved over half a decade ago are not finished yet. No landscaping as promised, no bin structure as promised. Same people. We suspect that these plots will be sold as the other ones were, or one was, and it will be a build to be put on, a new build. What controls, besides what we've read in the TDC, to the councillors be putting to make sure this happens, mostly in a timely fashion, but to what you're expecting to happen as laid out in the documents we've read? Because unfortunately thus far, and I did read the last set of documents you approved, those controls haven't worked. The things haven't happened. Now you could say it's just a timing issue, and I understand that. Over half a decade, coming on for 9 years now, nearly a decade, still hasn't happened yet. You gave them 3 years to start the build. They started it within 2 years and a half. They still haven't completed it. So I'm not going to take up the 4 minutes. I'd love you to discuss amongst yourselves what other controls and governance you would like to see placed on these two properties. And I'll remind Councillor Robinson, when you asked me last time, what was the 3 things? I gave you 3 things. You asked me what would make me comfortable with the builds, and I gave you 3 things. And I'll remind the councillors what I said. The first one was that you were given all the information to make an informed decision. Last time you weren't. I still suspect you weren't this time either with the porous roads. 2, that you understood the impact to our infrastructure, the impact it has on everybody else. And I'd love to see those taken into account. And the third thing, I wanted you to have clear transparency what the plan was for the whole field, not just this death for a piece of salami. A little cut off every time, another 2 buildings, another 2 buildings. So, Councillor, Chair, now, those 3 things I still think are still stand from what I said to you on the TDC some time ago. I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you. If you could turn the microphone off. Any questions for Mr. Wyatt? No. Thank you, Mr. Wyatt. If you could have Wyatt down again, you're already doing it. Thank you very much. And if we could have Catherine Miles once again, please. You have 4 minutes if you wish to use them. If you have anything to, or if you effectively have the permission you need, it's up to you whether you use the 4 minutes.
I didn't prepare a speech. I was going to react to whatever happened with the first application. I'm happy to answer, perhaps I shall just clarify the difference between what you've just approved and this application. I think that'd be helpful. So the first application you just approved was a technical details consent pursuant to the PIP granted in October 2019. That PIP application had a condition that an application for technical details consent must be made within 1 year. We made the technical details consent number 2 within that 1 year, but we were somewhat in a grey area over whether the council would determine, register, validate that application because of its proximity to the time period. See, the council did choose to validate it, and it has gone through. We submitted a full application, which is the application that's before you now, essentially as a backup. It's exactly the same in terms of its details. The difference is it's not a technical details pursuant to a PIP, it's a full application. So you apply principle of development, all the normal planning considerations that you would apply to any full PIP application. But I would say that you would give significant weight in your decision making, as I'm sure your officers will advise, to what is an extant permission in principle and TDC. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you. You've preempted my question, so you've answered that. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Has anybody else got any questions? Councillor Harp.
Catherine, I guess my question relates to the objector's points, really. And I appreciate you are not the applicant, but the agent of the applicant. And I guess this is, I don't know whether you can answer this or not in that regard. Clearly there is concern about the infrastructure in the close. Clearly there is concern about the implications of piecemeal development. And there are implications that sit outside of this planning application that perhaps the matters of building control or perhaps matters of other sources of control beyond this application, beyond this framework that we're deciding tonight. Where in the world does the applicant sit in that? Do you know? Partly because if they're already doing it piecemeal and they're doing it in terms of not building what they've got permission for, do they even appreciate the concerns the residents are raising?
Yeah, so with the development that's being undertaken currently, we've not been involved in that. I think it was the same landowner, but we didn't act for it. So I don't have the in-depth knowledge. So I don't know whether or not conditions have been complied with. I don't know whether there's any enforcement action or any investigation. I will mention it to my client because I've said I will talk to him after the committee and update what happened. So I will mention that to him. But as far as the application goes, that's really, I think, as far as I personally can go. In terms of the TDC and the full application, if that's approved, obviously there's conditions, there's an enforcement process if those conditions are not complied with. As we do with all our clients, we tell them to comply. It's ultimately, if they don't comply, that's not something that we can control, but I do advise of what the consequences are for non-compliance. In terms of the infrastructure, I know from the FOWL perspective, they have looked into that and they have been in discussions with the Environment Agency and proposed this biobubble solution. So that's great actually for nitrate neutrality because of the amount of discharge, the effluent into the ground is much less than if it goes off to FOWL. So that's a good solution. They have to pay to maintain it. It doesn't impact on the FOWL infrastructure. The surface water should all be dealt with on site and discharged to greenfield runoff rates. With electricity, I don't know because that's not something that we normally look at a planning stage. That's something that comes after planning. So I honestly don't know the impact of that. But I guess like with any development, you build extra houses, there needs to be additional infrastructure ultimately to eventually support that. if there is inadequacies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. If you can wipe down again. Questions to officers? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on the update paper, just to clarify, we've had an update on nitrates, and it would appear that the amount of woodland that's required for mitigation has basically a quarter of what it was before. What's the reasoning behind that? I mean, I would much rather we plant more woodland if possible.
Yeah, there were two options for nitrate mitigation. And the first was a connection to mains drainage with 1.1 hectares worth of woodland planting. But the connection to mains drainage meant that the amount of land that was required for offsetting the mitigation would be increased, because the development itself wouldn't be taking nitrates out out of the ground, out of the calculation. Whereas the proposal that's before us, so option B, is for the package treatment plant and an area of land offset, and the area of land is offset at 2.89 hectares. The difference is that package treatment plant. So the package treatment plant that deals with removes nitrate from the human effluent at source rather than taking it off site. So the difference between 0.289 hectares and the 1.1 hectares is a result of the proposal including a package treatment plant.
Okay. Any more questions? No, apart from myself. In planning terms, there is no difference between this application and the TDC that we have just looked at. Okay, thank you. Debate. Anybody like to start it off? I will if nobody else wants to. Okay, effectively, we have just already passed this. The only difference as I see it is timescales on the build. So therefore I'll propose it from the chair and seconded by Councillor McCormack. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that application is approved subject to the completion of a legal agreement and the conditions as set out in the main agenda paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 5, Whispering Oak, 1 Gravelly Close, North End, Evingar. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of a dwelling with a parking and soft landscaping scheme at Whispering Oak, 1 Gravelly Close, North End. There is a very short update for members, which is that the ward councillors for this application were incorrect on the main agenda, and they're corrected in the update paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, we have no speakers, so questions to officers? No? No questions to officers in that case? Debate. Anybody like to start it off? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll swap. I'll start it after. Reading the report, this is the officers. I don't see any reason to object to this, and hopefully the parish council is saying as well that they don't raise an objection on it. So I would move approval as recommended.
Move for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCormick. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak on it before we go to the vote? No. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Yep. Everyone again. We're going well. Item number 6.
Just confirm.
Sorry, Greg.
Sorry, Chairman, just to confirm that the application is approved subject to the conditions listed in the main agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 6, Keels Barn, Pantings Lane, Highclere, Evingar. Sue.
We are meant to have a speaker on this one, but we haven't got him in the chamber yet.
I need to go and check.
I think Bernie might have just gone down. Yeah. Do you want me to wait for? Okay, thank you. This is item 6. This is at Keels Barn. This is a full application for the removal and replacement of the roof with alterations to provide first floor accommodation, the erection of a replacement garage, cart lodge, garden, bike store, home office and annex accommodation. Proposals also include the erection of a detached outbuilding which incorporates a gym, sauna and yoga area. There's nothing on the update and the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sue. Could we have Daniel Bailey to the Speaker's chair?
Yeah, should I do something?
If you come forward a row.
You clarify where?
Yeah, I think you're far enough away over there. If you just take a seat there. No, one back. Yep. And microphone button is on the deck in front of you.
Yeah.
You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Do I need to press it?
Yes.
There we go. Good evening all. My wife Chantal behind me and I would like to thank you for your time this evening as you consider our proposed plans for Keels Barn. By way of explaining our personal situation and family background, we moved to Keels Barn and Highclere a little over 2 years ago with our young children Sophia and Lucas, having lived in the area for the last 10 years. Highclere appealed to us because our children attend the local school and we were drawn to the village because of its strong community ethos and our existing community ties. We believed it would be the perfect location in which to create our forever family home. We fell in love with Keels Barn, an arts and crafts house built in the 1950s that is set back from the highway in a large 1 acre plot, surrounded by mature garden, trees and hedgerow that maximise privacy for us and for our neighbours. The property itself was and is in need of significant modernisation. However, before rushing into this, we wanted to take the time to live at Keels Barn and consider our needs as well as our surroundings. Of course, during this time, the pandemic hit, which changed all of our lives immeasurably, and certainly the trajectory and the landscape of the way in which we live as a family. This has led us to thoughtfully reconsider our needs and how we might be able to create a modernised and flexible accommodation that would create the needs, that would cater for our needs today and in the future. In doing so, we considered the needs of our children, 12 and 8 years, how we create sufficient living and working space for both myself and my wife working from home, the needs of my wife's elderly mother, and in the future our needs as we grow older. These considerations form the basis of how we approach the design with our architect, thoughtfully and carefully extending the house in order to maximise living space, whilst working within the existing ridge levels in a style that enforce the arts and crafts design, all of which aim to maintain existing privacy to adjacent neighbours. We further carefully considered how we might replace existing and largely run-down garage and outbuilding, similar positions with single-storey buildings in their place. Further to the submission of our original application, we sought to speak with all immediate neighbours bordering Keels Barn to understand their feedback. As first-timers to this process, and with a desire to consider our bordering neighbours' needs also, we were keen to take this feedback on board and, where possible, amend our plans to accommodate. It is as a result of these conversations that we proactively resubmitted plans for the garage and annex accommodation to address their concerns, significantly reducing the scale of the building as detailed on page 240 by increasing the distance from the boundary, decreasing the height of the structure and incorporating a hip roof. Furthermore, We also sought to reduce the roofline of the proposed wellbeing centre as detailed on page 242, which in itself is a replacement of an existing structure in the same location of the garden, designed taking inspiration from the main house. This reduction was intended to mitigate scale, and in addition to bringing it inland, offers improved plant screening and maintenance of the boundary. Taking these steps, you will note that not all neighbours bordering Kills Barn are opposed to the plans, many actually expressing their support. Whilst we recognise that you'll need to give careful consideration towards our application, our hope in hearing from us is that you are reassured that the intention of this plan is to create a forever family home for our domestic and living purposes only. We've gone to great lengths to listen to and, where possible, accommodate the needs of our neighbours, subsequently reflected in the revised and resubmitted plans that you are considering today. Alongside these revisions, the imposed conditions by the planning officer, Jenny Oakley, directly address all objections raised that have legitimate planning consideration. So we thank you for your time this evening and for considering our plans. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have of us directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. If you could turn the microphone off, that would be helpful. Questions for Mr. Bailey? No, I have. Oh, Councillor Tomlin.
Thanks, Chair. Sort of hiding at the back here. Mr. Bailey, good evening. Just a general question. You've got a lot of roof space. Everybody knows what's coming next. Have you thought about solar panels? Have you thought about eco-friendly housing, how your lifetime home could potentially help the life of the borough in terms of carbon neutrality? Sorry.
So I will say that certainly we're looking to make sure the house is as sustainable as possible. So things like air source, heat pump are considerations. To be honest, we haven't explicitly considered solar panels. We're not against doing so. We've been very focused primarily on the living needs of us as a family. But certainly we will, wherever possible, look to maximise the efficiency of the house and certainly use materials and things such as air source heat pump to reduce carbon emissions.
Thank you. Turn the microphone off again, please. Any more questions? No, I have no questions. There's a box of wipes in front of you. If you could wipe down everything you've touched, it'll be helpful for the next speakers. Questions to officers? No, I have none. So debate. Councillor Harvey.
Go on, I'll start again. Again, I just look at the application. I like what they're doing with the property. I understand the shape and form of it. I don't agree with the number of the objections that are in here because they've been answered and addressed. The officer's conditions are strong enough, and I'm happy to move approval as the officers recommend.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Ganesh. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak on it? No. Moved and seconded for approval. Are those in favour?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that the application is approved, subject to the conditions and the informatives in the officer's report.
Thank you. Right. Holtzfield House, Wolverton Road, Wolverton Common. Sue again.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the erection of 2 3-bed detached dwellings and garages. There's nothing on the update and the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. Could we have Gideon Rutherford and Caroline Downey to the speakers' chairs? There are 2 chairs there, so. Right, you have 4 minutes between you. How you use that is entirely up to you. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you for your time. I'll be brief. My wife, family and I moved into Holtzfield House during the course of the pandemic. Like many people who I'm sure you would have heard the same message from, it's caused us to reevaluate our living arrangements, but also our wider family's living arrangements. And one of the key considerations around our application for the building of these two houses is with a view to potentially housing my elderly mother, who lives on her own and has certainly, through the course of the last 2 years, come to realise the value of proximity to her family. Added to that, the construction of these two houses allows the opportunity to make a significant improvement in the carbon footprint of the housing stock within the village. Something that we've worked on very closely in designing them is to be able to optimise the carbon footprint of these dwellings, both through air source heat pumps, insulation and solar panels. It also allows the opportunity to improve the biodiversity footprint of our wider dwelling site. Replanting of trees and hedgerows, I believe, will be very sympathetic and constructive for that basis. And the two dwellings, we believe, are very sympathetic to the wider village environment.
Chairman, members, thank you for your time this evening and for giving us the opportunity to present. The site, which I hope you saw from the video that we circulated earlier this week, runs along Wolverton Road, has existing access off that road with excellent visibility in both directions. The application is for two dwellings that are similar in style to the local vernacular and will be 1.5 stories in height, providing 3 bedrooms in each dwelling. The site is outside of a settlement boundary and therefore would be considered under the countryside policy of SS6. However, due to the 5-year housing land supply at 4.4 years, it means that the supply fails the test set out by the NPPF and that local policies SS1 and SS6 in this case should be given limited weight in the decision-making process. New dwellings therefore have to be considered in line with paragraph 11 of the NPPF, which states that relevant policies are out of date. Permission will be granted unless the harm and the application significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Furthermore, we agree wholeheartedly with the officer that the site is not isolated and the erection of two dwellings, although limited, will contribute to the local economy and make a positive contribution to the local housing position. And we commend the officer's report and support her 5 reasons for approval and hope that this committee will agree with the recommendation for approval. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions to the speakers? No, there are none. Thank you. And I can see you're already doing the wipe down. So thank you very much. Questions to officers? None. Debate. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Tomlin. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Unanimous again. Thank you very much. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. That the application be approved subject to the conditions and informatives in the officer's report. Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the erection of 3 detached dwellings. There is no update and the officer's recommendation is for approval subject to a legal agreement to secure off-site affordable housing contribution and an off-site ecological mitigation and secure biodiversity net gain. The officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sue. First speaker I have on my list is Mr. Tony Webb. Do we have Mr. Webb here? That looks like a no to me. In that case, Matt Williams. If you come to the speaker's chair, that's the one. And there is a button on the microphone for you and you have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors and officers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application as the applicant's agent. Firstly, I would like to commend Ms Page's report. It provides a very thorough and impartial consideration of the issues with this application in the context of relevant policies. You'll be aware that it's been suggested from local residents that there is no need for the size of the proposed dwellings, and I hope you've had a chance to review the email that I sent to members on Friday. In summary, the Council's 2015 Strategic Housing Market Assessment confirms that there is a substantial requirement for family houses with 3 or more bedrooms, and this is further confirmed in the Council's Housing SPD, suited to families based on the Council's own evidence. The applicants live in Newtown and have therefore gone to great lengths to achieve a very high quality development that will be in keeping with the character of the replacement dwelling and the new dwelling. They have already been granted planning permission on this site. Each plot will have a significant amount of amenity space which far ratio of each dwelling is comparable with both existing and proposed development in the site's context. The resulting development of the site provides a development density of 6 dwellings to the hectare, which is very low, retained and protected by conditions, and a landscape plan proposes additional planting to further contain and soften the development, and again that will be secured by condition. There have been no objections from the Council's tree and landscape officers. The distances between the proposed dwellings and neighbouring properties also exceeds the SPD requirements to ensure that the amenity of local residents will not be adversely affected by the proposal. Ms Page's will not be affected, and the level of parking complies with the parking standards SPD. Ms Page's report identifies a number of conditions which the applicants accept to make this development acceptable, and these conditions will ensure there will be no adverse impacts to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the combined social, economic and environmental benefits with this proposal.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. So in conclusion, we therefore sincerely hope that you will grant planning permission in accordance with the recommendation before you.
Thank you very much. If you can have a wipe down of everything you've touched, I'm sure Councillor Isaac would appreciate that. Councillor Isaac, you're next. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening. Executive-style houses in the hamlet of Newtown Common on a steeply rising and visible plot, which currently contains Newtown Court Farm and, in addition, a plot for a further permitted 5-bedroom executive home, which is yet to be built. So 5 houses in total on the site. It is being claimed that the proposed houses would be an appropriate design and siting, would relate to surrounding development, and would not result in significant impacts on the local landscape character or scenic quality of the area. As ward councillor, I completely disagree with this planning argument. Newtown dates back over 800 years and is a small hamlet of scattered homes close to the boundary of West Berks and spreading urban Newbury, with which it provides a green. What is being proposed here is nothing less than the suburbanisation of this ancient attractive countryside hamlet by 3 large 2.5-storey executive houses that are out of character and will not meet any local need. There is nothing else like this development in Newtown. It would be an unwell mood, I believe, by DC members. Local Plan Policy EM1, which continues to apply notwithstanding the lack of a 5-year housing land supply, states that proposals should be sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area and must respect, enhance and not be detrimental to the character or visual amenity of the landscape. These proposals do nothing of the sort. The NPPF states that development should establish or maintain a strong sense of place, be sympathetic to the local character and history, and be guidance contained within SPDs. This borough's SPD sets out key design principles, including, I quote, ensuring that the character of rural. These proposals seek to squash as many executive homes as possible onto the site. Given the steeply rising topography, it is hard to see how good design and relationship. Newtown has no housing allocation under the current local plan, and none is proposed in the draft LPU appropriate to inflict another 3 large homes on Newtown. Policy EM1 and the MPF gives this committee the ability to report confirms that these proposals will only make a small contribution to the borough's housing supply, but if approved, the adverse impacts would outweigh the benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, speakers, but we'll keep it clean. Questions to officers?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a lot of sympathy with what Councillor Isaac's arguing, actually, so I've got to say. I get the appropriateness and the argument about being sympathetic to the landscape and before moving anything or considering moving anything.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll second it. Councillor Godison, thank you. Sue.